Hello, everyone. Welcome to my podcast for everyone who wants to build a successful career or business through unlocking their unique value. Just a quick note for everyone who is listening. Please follow me on Substack and LinkedIn. These are my main channels where you can find my content. And of course, you can find these podcasts on YouTube. The links to all these channels will be provided in the description. Do please comment on these podcasts, and I'd love to hear back from all of you. My guest today is someone who came into my life not so long ago, but became one of those who had a profound impact on what I am doing now. He was a professional musician, a creative producer for Europe's largest center for the arts, and now he is a faculty member at the Academy of Executive Coaching. He has been through major transformations himself in his career, and he talks about these experiences in another podcast, the Coach's Journey podcast, where he recently became a co-host. So if you want, you can also check out those. Besides his curiosity and many other great qualities, he is known for his incredible listening skills and ability to hold space in a conversation. And I can confirm that. And it is my genuine pleasure to interview today Neil McKinnon. Hi, Neil. Welcome to my podcast. How are you?
Thank you for the welcome. And I am well, thank you. Yeah, I'm good. And I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you for accepting this crazy idea to join this initiative. And you are actually a #1 male guest on my podcast so far. Wow. I do plan to have more, but #1 is always #1. Do you feel the pressure now?
I do feel the pressure, yes. And as lovely as that is, I am cautious of speaking for the entire male gender. So, albeit that I'm #1, I believe contrasting views and opinions may well follow. And as far as I'm concerned, they're all welcome.
Yeah, that's all fine. That's all fine here. You were my coach and my trainer at the Executive Academy, at the Academy of Executive Coaching, and you had a great impact on my development as a coach. And as I am now starting on this journey myself, and you also doing podcasts with other coaches, and you are sort of working on spreading the word about coaching and its benefits. And I fully support this idea because I think we need to talk more about what coaching can bring to the world. And not a lot of people are realizing that. It's what I see as well. When I start to coach people, there's a lot of confusion about what is coaching, what is mentorship, and all these things. And people are not really clear about what coaching can help them with. And so it's great to speak to someone who's already so experienced and established and successful as a coach, but also went through a lot of transformations yourself in your career. So you've been there, you know what it's like. And when I was thinking about the topic for this podcast, I really had hard time to pick one topic because I had like 20 ideas that I'd love to talk to you about. And then I decided to ask my audience, my people on LinkedIn, in my social media channels, what would you like me to talk about next? And one of the topics that came out was setting up goals. And I'm guessing because we are at the beginning of this year, and this is the time when people had some time off, they went on holidays, they had opportunity to relax and reflect on the past year, and probably use the downtime to also start thinking about the next year. What am I going to do? What are my goals? And so on and so forth. So this topic came up very clearly, and I thought that would be great to get your perspective on this and pick your brain. So my first question, I guess, would be, and feel free to share your personal opinion, but also yeah, also your experiences with these things, because I think that would be even more interesting to know.
Hmm.
What about you? How do you set up goals for yourself?
Wow. There's a number of different answers to that question because it will depend on what area of my life I am setting them up in, I guess. And I think we were talking before we hit record about how throughout the course of this conversation, indeed on many things, not least goals, I'll share my thoughts and opinions, and that doubtless be contrasting ones. So this is just my approach. So perhaps because of the nature of your podcast, if we come at this from a business perspective, I think goals are incredibly useful because they help us frame intentionality and what we're aiming to achieve. It's my view that there might be some questions to ask ourselves in advance of serving, or rather, in advance of setting goals. For example, what's the overall purpose? So, in my business, I spent quite some time early on asking the question, what is my overall vision for the business? What is it that I am seeking to achieve? What is the world I want to live in as relates to my business? And then what am I going to do about that? So there's a vision, there's then mission. What are the things I'm going to get involved in that are going to help me realize this vision of a business that does this set of things, supports this set of people, is involved in this type of work? And then understanding my values. How are the ways I show up in the world going to inform me going on this mission to realize this vision? That's a very quick way of saying how I go about setting the context to place meaningful goals within. So it's, if you like, the map of the territory within which I'm setting goals. And for me, the goals will be subjective. So they will be personal to me, and they will perhaps, in contrast to some, be hopefully time bound. They'll have an element of specific time frame to them. And I'll seek to get clarity on, first of all, what I'm trying to achieve. So that will be the first thing in terms of setting a goal, is being able to describe to myself at least, and probably others, like what the goal is in simple terms. So, for example, there was a period in my business where I noticed I was beginning to work more with creative entrepreneurs in the tech space, and that I was enjoying that work. And so I set a goal of, over the course of the next 6 months, I'd like to bring more creative entrepreneurs working in the tech space into the client base of my business. I think I'm supporting them well. I think it's interesting work. I think it has value in terms of people building things that are going to affect lots of people. And I think I can continue to contribute in a meaningful way there. So that might be the articulation of a goal.
You've touched on a lot of important elements. You said vision, mission, and values, and I think that yeah, that sparks a lot of questions in my head right away. I feel that, I suppose, this algorithm of thinking, what is my vision, what's my mission, what are my values, how I'm going to align with my values, my goals. This algorithm could also be applied to not only business, but also career. People who are working for companies, they can also approach it in the same way. But a lot of times when I see that people are ignoring or not paying attention to their values, and you've mentioned values right away. So what role values play in your process, and at what point, and how do you integrate your values into your goal setting?
So I think values are unique to each of us, and whether we like it or not, they're already present. So they're not something that we work towards creating, but we have them by the way that we show up in the world. Now, my belief is that there will be different levels of awareness of those values. And over the course of certainly the last, I'd say probably 15 years, I've personally sought to get more awareness of what the values are that I want to operate alongside, or more clarity on what my values are, and the way an understanding of them help me show up in the world in the best possible way I can. So I think that's the first thing to say, is that I've spent time getting clear on what they are.
Mhm.
Um, the second thing is, I guess, they can, so an example, or examples of some might be honesty, reliability, um, dynamic, and those sound quite, even as I say them, they sound relatively abstract. So I don't think they are something that can help um, create specific goals, but I think they help as a navigation system. So it's a slightly long-winded way of saying my values show up as something to test the articulation of goals against, or if I'm so another example might be, if in pursuit of having more entrepreneurs operational in the tech space as part of my client base of my business, if an opportunity comes up that I have some questions around, I will certainly use my values to help me answer those questions. Am I being honest with myself about the positives and negatives of this opportunity? Is this going to allow me to show up energetically as relates to what the opportunity involves, so on and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great example. It really makes it clear how to actually um, align with your values. And the example that you gave about the clients that you wanted to attract to your business, that goal seems to me as a very smart goal, what they call in the business, that they have this approach that the goal needs to be measurable, achievable. And do you use that approach as well, or you follow more your sort of instincts and your experience when you set up goals?
Yeah, so I don't, and this goes back to my initial point about it depends on the different parts of my life that I might be setting goals in. I think the SMART acronym can be useful. So to name it for those that aren't familiar with it: specific, measurable, achievable, related, and time bound. And I think that can be useful, and I don't think it's the whole story. I think goals, well articulated goals, can have more elements to it, and have more depth. I also think there's and here's where one could argue we're getting into the realm of semantics, but I think there is an argument to be made about the SMART acronym being more relevant to objectives than goals. So to my point about goals are, by their very nature, subjective.
Mhm.
Objectives are, I mean, the clues in the title are by their very nature objective. And so I think the acronym SMART can simplify something that is inherently more complex. So I do use it, but it's not the whole story. I think goals need to have more depth and more subjectivity for them truly to be useful.
This is very interesting. I never heard this explanation of objective and goals. It's really, really interesting. And English can be super tricky, especially for me as a non-native speaker, but I am studying English my whole life, even professionally. Still, the difference between the concepts of intention, purpose, and goal. It's they're all very close, but at the same time, they all mean different things. And I think that's sometimes people are confusing those things. What would you say is the difference between intention, purpose, and goal?
Oh, goodness. I think there's a real danger that of over explaining what is inevitably going to be somewhat individualistic. So to give headlines, and there's absolutely, as you rightly say, they are very similar. And there's, I think with all of this stuff, there are blurred edges and there is overlap. Like
Mhm.
if you laid them out in a Venn diagram, I think that there would be a high level of overlap. And I also notice as I begin to explore it, I might explain it to myself differently in different places. Um, for me, intention is what is what is behind me asking myself this question, or potentially taking this step or getting involved in this activity, like what is driving it. Purpose is somewhat speaks to the bigger vision piece, like
Mhm.
what's the overall um constellation of things that I hope to achieve by doing this one small thing. And goal is what's the subjective, qualitative framing I can make of the smaller thing I'm trying to do. And so continuing the example of getting this demographic, being more focused in attracting this demographic into my client base. Um, and one could absolutely argue that having more tech entrepreneurs in my client base has elements of an objective to it. There are objective factors involved. So I think it's really easy to begin to try and over explain things that, as you rightly say, are closely connected.
Right. And so in your coaching practice, do you have people that approach you with this request to help them work on their goals? And if so, how do you help them? How does coaching help them?
Yeah. So the simple answer to the first question is yes, people do. Uh, the answer to the second question is both much more complex because it's going to be different for each individual, depending on their needs, depending on their, for example, awareness of what the bigger purpose or vision is that they're serving. Um, and in some ways, it's there's also a simple answer that coaching can help them in the way that is right for them. So how I or one of the ways I describe coaching is acting as a thought partner for another person, following
Mhm.
their agenda and supporting them to get more of what it is that they want. Um, so that's a fairly headline answer to the how coaching can support them. But I think it speaks to the adaptability of coaching as a practice.
Mhm. And from your experience, what can you say? Do people need to have specific mind shifts or habits that they should develop to enhance their abilities for goal setting?
I don't know if there's a specific mindset or habit. I think there's a value in slowing down and asking oneself in appropriate situations, what am I trying to do here? So one of the phrases that came up recently in a discussion online, and I'd heard it on a podcast, and in fact, actually, it may well have been an episode of the Coach's Journey podcast that I heard it on, the one that you referenced that I've become part of the host team on, is we need to be careful what we're practicing because we're always practicing something. So what I mean by that is if goal setting is going to be useful, it is as a result of more intentional behavior. And that can come from, it's not the only way it can come, but it can come from slowing down and asking ourselves, what's going on? So flirting with the danger of getting quite meta here. For example, you and I are spending some of our valuable time today having a conversation that is being recorded, and it is going to be distributed on a platform for others to consume. And so what is the purpose of us having that conversation? Well, one imagines that it's hopefully going to be useful to some of those people that choose to listen to it. It's also going to draw attention to you and I as people that have a service to provide as coaches. It's highly likely, at least from my perspective, that by having this conversation, I'm going to learn something. So I'm going to develop as a human being and as a coach. I'll be slightly better, hopefully, than I was when I entered the conversation. And as you rightly said, you and I have spent time together in the past, and I've certainly found that enjoyable. And it sounds like you've got some things from it too. So it's going to be an enjoyable experience having this conversation. And when you initially asked me to come on the podcast, I slowed down and I thought about some of those things. I considered what would be the value in me spending some of this incredibly important resource of time in having a conversation with Luba and so on and so forth. And those and other things came up. Like I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I want to support it and contribute in a way I can. And in some ways, there's a a bit of goal setting, a bit of intentionality going on in there. Is let's find a time that's at a place where I've got sufficient energy to wholly show up and do justice to the process. Let's have a bit of a conversation before about what we might explore when we're doing it, and setting all these markers or bits of framework in terms of the goal, which for me at least is us having a meaningful experience and hopefully leading to something that benefits others. Hopefully that made some sort of sense in relation to
Yeah,
what
no,
was happening.
I always admire how can you, make things so clear in such a short period of time. And you chose that example of our podcast that we've just agreed to do some time ago, not so long ago. And it's amazing that indeed its goal is, yeah, it's difficult, I think, for people and for me as well sometimes to slow down, to take that time to really think what is the value for me. And I am doing it more now because I am also I have sort of changed my mindset about this, and I do think indeed more from the perspective, does it align with my values, and what is the purpose of me doing this? So it needs to kind of pass that test first before I actually jump on it. And that is really indeed the moment where you need to make an effort to slow down, to take the moment, reflect on it. I think a lot of people are struggling to find that moment for reflection. Hopefully, when people were off for Christmas holidays, they had more time to slow down, reflect on things. This is what they usually do. But in ideal world, we should do this all the time before we make a decision to actually start doing something. And another thing, what came to my mind while you were speaking is that actually a connection of goal setting with energy. Because if you are setting up a goal, like we set up the goal, or I set up the goal to do the podcast and share this meaningful conversation, requires me to put my energy, and you requires you as well to put your energy into this. So a goal is not a goal if you're not putting energy into it. It's just an idea, basically. Once you start making small steps to achieve that goal, and you start investing it, you start putting your energy, your resource, your time into this, then it becomes a goal. What do you think about this?
Yes, I agree. And so one thing I want to catch before we move further downstream from the initial point is there's also, of course, a value in uh, in doing something. So, for example, prior to us sitting down to record, I went to my kitchen. I'm recording from my home office, and got a drink. And I didn't think a great deal about the bigger purpose and so on and so forth. And so I think there's a distinction to be made between our everyday doing of things, such as going and getting a drink, or popping out to the shops to buy some food, or feeling cold and turning on the heating, or whatever's going on. I guess it's more the things that are going to take up significant resource and that we have a bit more choice about. I think the other key thing as relates to energy and the specifics or the important elements in a goal is I do believe there's value in a goal being time bound because it moves us into action. It takes hopefully some of that energy and turns it into doing something in the world. Um, so many of us, myself included, work better with deadlines. And I think the combination of having energy behind something and agreeing with yourself when you're going to do it by is important.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. And so what I'm hearing is that what you're saying, that if you do this inner work, reflections, and your alignment with your values, with your purpose and intention and so on, then you set up your own goals, and then you get the energy to achieve them. But a lot of times I get people to talk about goals, and we find out that it's actually not their own goal. They've heard it from someone, they've copied it, they thought that was their goal. But then when they started digging deep into themselves, they started to discover that's actually not actually what I want. That's not really my goal. Have you ever had such an experience, and how did you help those clients who discovered that, yeah, suddenly those are not were their own goals?
Absolutely. I think I've had the experience myself,
Mhm.
and in some respects, it's what points me towards the importance of vision, mission, values, is that helps you interrogate whether or not this is your goal. Is it building towards the world that I envision if I'm successful in doing these things? Does it form part of my mission? Is it in alignment with my values? Now, one of the things that I believe I'm enormously fortunate about, fortunate in, is that I work largely autonomously, running a one-to-one coaching practice, and as to your point of the way that we met, I'm a part-time faculty member with the Academy of Executive Coaching, and so I've answered the bigger question around what the AOEC does in terms of my vision and my mission. And I'm clear that the goals of that organization are wholly in alignment with my vision, mission, and values. And so, and I have in the past looked at some of the goals that have been part of my life that maybe I didn't set or that I thought I'd set, but as you rightly say, were perhaps not mine and not exactly what I wanted to move towards. And being able to look at my captured version of the vision, mission, values was enormously powerful then. And I think in many respects that translates to how I support clients, is checking in with, to what extent is that what you really want? How aligned with your vision of the future is this? And if it's not, then what's behind you pouring your energy into it? And I say that with an awareness that with people that have jobs and are employed by an organization who understandably will set goals for them, or one hopes will set goals in collaboration with them, that there may be a limit of choice to exactly what those goals are. And indeed, for many years, I was an employee of an organization and had those experiences. And so it becomes a bigger question of, okay, so you are willing to give of yourself and your direction as relates to these goals for another set of things. So for example, when I was an employee at South Bank Centre, I gave of my time to the organization and supported it in pursuit of its goals. And indeed, absolutely did so willingly. And I got a whole host of other things back. I got to spend time amongst an enormously creative group of people and work towards an organization that had a very clear vision, mission, and values that I was wholly aligned with. I got a salary. I got a lovely job title that helped me connect with people that I could potentially do work with for that organization. So I think it helps make sense of things, I guess, by investigating what's really going on here. To your initial question, if somebody's found that the goal is not theirs, then it's okay, whose is it? For what reason has it become part of what you're using your resource towards? And do you want to do that? Like, is that in best service of other things in your life? It could be it's part of what's expected of you in your job. And, that perhaps raises some bigger questions if it's really incongruent with what that person is willing to do with their time or their energy or their attention, then perhaps they need to ask themselves some bigger questions. Am I in the right job? Am I in the right industry? And so on.
Yeah, and this is where coaching is very powerful to help you figure that out, instead of trying to sort this out by yourself, trying to talk to your friends or family. You can get the answers much quicker if you are going into a coaching session. So I'm promoting a little bit what we do, of course. No, this is a very interesting conversation, and I've had as well experience when I had set up goals that were not mine, and I felt some disappointment when I have discovered that they are not mine. And in fact, this was a very interesting experience because I since that moment, I actually started to like disappointment. I realized that if you look at the word disappointment, you actually dis and a point, and it means that something disappears, which means that you let go of that. I made that connection because I am a little bit of a language nerd, and I realized that, oh wow, it's actually a very positive thing. Disappointment is actually removes the illusion that you have, and you actually are able to move on. And so it helped me to embrace the disappointment that those were not my goals, but then I could quickly accept it and move on. So that's a little bit of my story to add to yours. And mindful of the time that we have, I wanted to ask you one last question about, as we are talking about setting up goals, I was wondering if you could give some tips or advice to people who are indeed working in companies or building a business, and they are struggling to set up their goals, or maybe they are confused what to begin with. What would be your like top 3 things to do when you are trying to set goals for next year?
Goodness me. So I think be willing to ask yourself the big questions, and to answer them honestly, because I think, to your point about how we can inherit others' goals, we can also inherit others' narratives or beliefs on what we want, why we are doing things. And so I think find some big questions that are relevant to you. Ones that I find useful are, what am I doing? And I mean that in a sincere, non-woolly, specific way, in as much as, again, let's, for the sake of argument, say that this is about my business. So were I to ask myself the question right in this moment, what am I doing? The answer might be some version of, I'm seeking to be involved in interesting, edifying, creative endeavor in support of others that makes hopefully their lives, and by proxy the world, a better place, and returns value in many different ways to them and to me, affords me the opportunity to live an interesting, sustainable life, to provide for my family, and to be a good citizen in the world. That's what comes up. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. What might I do in my day-to-day that supports me in doing that better? And an example might be, I might do better to spend more time following the agenda I set myself than allowing other people's emails to me becoming my default agenda for the day, and being in a reactive place rather than a tactical or strategic place. Okay, so I've got an answer to that. What's the goal I could set that will support me in doing that? And it might be, starting tomorrow, I will only check my emails for a half hour in the morning and a half hour in the afternoon. And the rest of the time, I'll stay out of my inbox and focus on the things that I'm saying that matter. And then let's see how that goes. So I guess it's going from the big questions down to what you can actually do about it in a realistic way. Other big questions might be, what's the most important thing for me to attend to now? And following a similar process of answering these bigger questions down to what's the specific thing that I can set. Now, I came up with a very simple, clear, time-boundaried goal there, that I can run an active experiment for over the next 4 days and see where it got to, where I got to with it. You know, maybe I achieve it, maybe I don't. And one could argue that that's got elements of objective to it. Again, it's very specific and so on and so forth. But I guess it's hard to answer the smaller goal specific questions without an answer to the bigger question of what is the purpose of the goal? What's the vision you're serving? So in some respects, perhaps what I'm saying is, if it's around goals for health or goals for financial well-being or goals for family environment, like what are the bigger questions you need to answer before you can get down to the specifics? I'll give you another final example that I find physical exercise enormously important and powerful, as relates to my overall well-being in the world. And toward the latter part of last year, I, excuse me, set a goal to run a marathon in the mid part of this year, 2024. And over Christmas, I had some ill health and was noticing that for some time my energy hasn't been where I hoped it to be. And long story short, I re-investigate the goal of like what's the purpose of me working towards better physical health. And the broader purpose is in this moment not to complete a marathon, but rather it's to regain my energy and have a better practice as regards my physical health. So in some respects, I checked in with the goal that, albeit I had set it, was in some respects it was a previous version of me that had set it prior to losing a 3 weeks block of training over Christmas and so on and so forth. And kind of asked myself the bigger question and came back down to I need, the thing that's right for me is I need to let go of the marathon. It's not going to happen in the first part of this year. I need to refocus on what will get me back to full physical health. And then, and to your earlier point, which I thought was beautifully expressed around language, yes, there was some disappointment in that. And that freed me up to let go of it and move on to, okay, what's within my locus of control?
Yeah.
What steps can I take to answer the bigger vision and reset my goals in order that they're not beholden to a previous version of myself that didn't have the information and experience I now have and can recalibrate and reset.
Yeah, I think it's super important indeed what you mentioned out that goals are not something that you set in stone and you need to die to achieve them. You need to evaluate them, refocus, and see, and sort of reshape them even if it's needed. I think that's really important, but also taking the time to work on that and taking the time to slow down to ask yourself the big questions. I think that is really a fundamental step that we should all do. And thank you so much for giving your advice, for sharing your perspective with me and listeners of this podcast. I'm sure they will find it useful. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. You've reminded me of a lot of important things that I knew before, but somewhere they are at the back of my head. But it's always good to remind and keep them in focus. Is there anything else that you would like to add at the end?
I think I'd like to steal something from a recent guest on the Coach's Journey podcast, Julie Starr, and she had a very powerful way of closing out our conversation when I interviewed her, where she said, take what's useful and leave the rest. So if something in what I've shared has sparked something for you as a listener, then take that and use it and forget about everything else, because it is my opinion, and it is imbued with my subjectivity and positionality. And if you can plug in one small bit into hopefully what's already working for you as relates to your practice, then that's wonderful. And do throw out the rest, because it may not all be useful to you. And reassurance that if there are things that are working for you in supporting your intentionality and working towards creating the vision that you hope to have in your life, then fantastic. Don't change those. Perhaps refine and add to them from anything useful you've found here today.
Thank you. Very wise words again. For me, this is great to hear this, and indeed I heard a lot of things that sparked my interest. But what I know will happen next is that I will continue thinking about it, and eventually some things will integrate into my mindset. And it's really a beautiful process when conversations like this, they start something that they kind of plant a seed in you, and then they start growing, and then something really beautiful and your own actually starts to blossom in you. And that's the idea. So it's not the idea that you listen to someone and you copy paste what they do. Basically, it's about getting that inspiration or hearing a different perspective on things. Then they will trigger a new process that will lead to something meaningful for me or for other people who will listen. So I hope that we will that this goal will be achieved, that people who listen to this episode will indeed take something what works for them or what inspires them.
Yeah, lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a lovely conversation, and I really appreciate it.